October 24th, 2020. The air inside the Bund Finance Center in Shanghai is recycled, cool, and heavy with unspoken tension. The room is filled with the most powerful people in the Eastern Hemisphere. We are talking about the governors of the People's Bank of China, senior regulators, and the bureaucratic elite that keeps the gears of the world's second-largest economy grinding. They are sitting in comfortable chairs, expecting a comfortable speech. They are waiting for Jack Ma. At this precise moment, Jack Ma is not just a man. He is a deity of capitalism. He is the founder of Alibaba, the richest man in China, and the visionary behind Ant Group. In just a few days, Ant Group is scheduled to go public. It is not just an IPO. It is projected to be the largest initial public offering in the history of the human race, valuing his fintech empire at over $300 billion. It is the coronation of Chinese innovation. It is the moment China proves it doesn't just copy Silicon Valley, it surpasses it. But when Jack Ma takes the podium, he doesn't offer the expected platitudes. He doesn't thank the regulators for their wisdom. He doesn't bow to the system that allowed him to rise. Instead, he leans into the microphone and delivers 20 minutes of blistering criticism that will cost him everything. He calls the global banking standards a club for the elderly. He accuses the Chinese state banks of having a pawn shop mentality, demanding collateral because they lack the sophistication to judge character or credit. He tells the room, essentially, that they are dinosaurs waiting for the meteor. The audience laughs nervously. Some applaud. But in the front row, the faces of the party officials do not move. They are not amused, they are taking notes. What happened next is a story that has been whispered about in boardrooms from Wall Street to Shenzhen, but rarely understood in its entirety. Jack Ma didn't just lose an IPO, he vanished. For months, the most recognizable face in Asia simply ceased to exist in the public eye. Billions of dollars in value evaporated overnight. An entire generation of entrepreneurs watched in horror as the golden age of Chinese tech was systematically dismantled. And then just as mysteriously, the narrative shifted again. In early 2025, after years of silence and exile, Jack Ma reappeared at the right hand of the state. Why? What happened in those lost years to break the will of a titan? And more importantly, what does his return tell us about the terrifying fragility of the global economy? To understand the return, we must first understand the crime. And the crime wasn't the speech. The speech was just the smoking gun. The crime was the business model itself. The architect of the future. To understand the magnitude of the fall, we have to appreciate the height of the pedestal. Before 2020, Jack Ma was the only Chinese businessman who had achieved true global rock star status. He wasn't a drab industrialist pumping out steel or concrete. He was a former English teacher with a lopsided grin and a penchant for dressing up in Michael Jackson costumes at company parties. He was Daddy Ma. He represented the Chinese dream, the idea that in the new China, intellect and grit could triumph over bloodlines and bureaucracy. He built Alibaba into the Amazon of the East, but his ambitions went far beyond selling toaster ovens and cheap electronics. His true masterpiece was Ant Group. And this is where the story gets technical and where the danger really began. Most people think of Alipay, the core of Ant Group, as just a digital wallet, a way to buy bubble tea with a QR code. If that's all it was, the government would have loved it. But Ant Group had evolved into something much more potent. It was a data monster. By 2020, Ant Group handled over 118 trillion yuan in transactions annually. That is more than MasterCard and Visa combined, but they weren't just processing payments. They were using the data from those payments to build psychological and financial profiles of 1 billion people. They knew who you were, what you bought, when you woke up, and how likely you were to pay back a loan. And they used this data to bypass the state banking system entirely. This is the mechanism that terrified the old guard, Ant Group created a product called Huabei, essentially a virtual credit card, and Jibei, a microloan service. They could approve a loan in seconds to a user that a traditional bank would ignore. But here is the trick: the hidden mechanism that printed money. Ant Group didn't actually lend its own money. They acted as a middleman. They would originate the loan, take a service fee, and then pass the debt and the risk onto the state-owned banks. At the peak of their power, Ant Group was originating massive amounts of credit while keeping only about 2% of the loans on their own balance sheet. The other 98% of the risk sat with the banks. Jack Ma had essentially privatized the profits and socialized the risk. He was leveraging the entire Chinese financial system to fuel his own growth, all while operating outside the strict capital requirements that shackled the traditional banks. It was brilliant. It was efficient. It was wildly profitable. And to the Chinese Communist Party, it was an existential threat. They saw a private company that acted like a central bank but answered to no one. They saw a man who held the financial data of the entire population on private servers. In the eyes of President Xi Jinping, Jack Ma hadn't just built a company. He had built a rival kingdom. The Empire Strikes Back. The reaction to the Bund Summit speech was not a temper tantrum. It was a calculated, systemic demolition. The speed at which the state apparatus moved suggests that the plans were likely already drawn up, waiting for an excuse. Jack Ma gave them that excuse on a silver platter. On November 2nd, 2020, mere days before the Ant Group IPO was set to ring the opening bell in Shanghai and Hong Kong, Jack Ma was summoned. The terminology used by the state media was regulatory interview. In reality, it was a dressing down. The Shanghai Stock Exchange suspended the IPO the very next day. Just pause and consider the scale of this. $34 billion of fresh capital was blocked at the finish line. Investment bankers who had already ordered their Ferraris were left staring at blank screens. But the cancellation of the IPO was just the opening salvo. The party needed to send a message, not just to Ma, but to every tech mogul who thought they were bigger than the collective. The message was simple: there is no too big to fail in China. There is only too big to tolerate. The crackdown that followed was swift and brutal. It started with Alibaba. In April 2021, regulators slapped the company with a record-breaking $2.8 billion fine for antitrust violations. They claimed Alibaba was forcing merchants to choose between them and their competitors, a practice known as choose one of two. While the accusation was factually true, it was a practice that had been ignored for a decade. Suddenly, the law mattered. Then came the restructuring. Ant Group was forced to detach its payment app, Alipay, from its lucrative lending businesses. They were ordered to restructure as a financial holding company, subjecting them to the same suffocating capital requirements as the state banks Ma had mocked. The data monopoly was broken. The information advantage that justified their $300 billion valuation was legislated out of existence. And it didn't stop with Jack. The contagion spread. Didi Chuxing, the Uber of China, committed the arrogance of listing on the New York Stock Exchange despite warnings from Beijing. Days after their IPO, the cybersecurity regulators deleted Didi from every app store in the country. The stock collapsed. The education sector was next. Overnight, the government banned for-profit tutoring, wiping out billions in value from companies like New Oriental and Tal Education. They called it common prosperity. Investors called it a bloodbath. During this carnage, Jack Ma, the man who couldn't stop talking, went silent. He disappeared from his TV show, Africa's Business Heroes. His social media accounts, once buzzing with activity, went dormant. Rumors swirled. Was he under house arrest? Was he in a black jail? Was he even alive? The silence of the Tokyo winter. For nearly 2 years, the location of Jack Ma was the world's favorite guessing game. Occasionally, a grainy photo would surface. Jack Ma playing golf in Hainan. Jack Ma visiting a greenhouse in the Netherlands. But the most substantial reports placed him in Tokyo. Living in the heart of Japan, Ma was reportedly keeping a low profile, socializing with a small circle of expats, painting and studying agricultural technology. It was a stark contrast to the stadium-filling rock star of 2019. This was a man in exile. But his silence was a loud tactical move. In the Chinese system, once you have been chastised, the only way to survive is to show absolute contrition. You must become invisible. You must show that you have no political ambitions, no desire to influence the masses. You must become just a rich guy who likes farming. But while Jack was painting watercolors in Tokyo, the Chinese economy was beginning to rot from the inside. The crackdown on the tech sector, combined with the draconian zero-COVID policies, had created a crisis of confidence. The animal spirits of the economy, the psychological drive that encourages entrepreneurs to take risks and invest, were dead. Young people in China began to embrace a philosophy known as Tang Ping, or lying flat. If working hard like Jack Ma only led to being crushed by the state, why bother? If the reward for innovation was a target on your back, why innovate? Youth unemployment soared to record highs, eventually becoming so bad that the government simply stopped publishing the data. Foreign capital, the lifeblood of China's modernization, began to flee. In 2024, foreign direct investment into China collapsed. Companies like Apple and Dell accelerated their exodus to India and Vietnam. The real estate market, formerly the engine of Chinese growth, imploded with the collapse of Evergrande and Country Garden. The stock market was in freefall. The trillions of dollars in value erased from Alibaba, Tencent, and Meituan wasn't just paper money. It was the retirement savings of millions of people. It was the future tax revenue of the state. President Xi Jinping had successfully consolidated power. He had reminded the billionaires who was boss. But he had achieved a Pyrrhic victory. He had secured the steering wheel, but the engine of the car was sputtering. The party realized, perhaps too late, that they couldn't simply command the economy to grow by decree. They needed the entrepreneurs. They needed the private sector. They needed the very people they had spent 3 years demonizing. The Uncomfortable Handshake. This brings us to the present day, the year 2025, the turn of the tide. The economic data from the previous year was not just bad, it was catastrophic. Fixed asset investment was stagnant. Consumption was anemic. The ghost of deflation was haunting the streets of Shanghai and Beijing. The leadership in Beijing realized that common prosperity sounds great in a speech, but it doesn't pay the bills if there is no wealth left to redistribute. So the signal went out. The wolf warrior diplomats were told to smile, the regulators were told to holster their weapons, and Jack Ma was told it was time to come home. On February 17th, 2025, the impossible happened. Xi Jinping hosted a high-profile summit for business leaders at the Great Hall of the People. The imagery was carefully curated. Red carpets, warm handshakes, and there amidst the sea of suits was the familiar, slightly older face of Jack Ma. The optics were designed to scream one message to the world: China is open for business. The state media ran stories praising the entrepreneurial spirit. They spoke of the vital role of private platforms in the digital economy. It was a complete 180-degree turn. It was a rehabilitation tour. But let's analyze what is actually happening here. This isn't a reconciliation born of friendship. It is a marriage of desperation. The CCP needs Jack Ma to signal to foreign investors that the water is safe. They need him to signal to the disillusioned Chinese youth that it's okay to dream again. They are parading him like a prize pony, proof that the crackdown is over. However, the Jack Ma that returned is not the Jack Ma who left. The man who stood on that stage in 2020 and challenged the system is gone. The 2025 version is quieter. He speaks of compliance and serving the national interest. He has relinquished control of Ant Group. His voting rights slashed from over 50% to a mere 6%. He is no longer a threat. He is a mascot. The irony is palpable. In his 2020 speech, Ma warned that managing the future with the methods of the past would lead to stagnation. He warned that suppressing risk would lead to no innovation. 5 years later, the Chinese economy is suffering from exactly the stagnation he predicted. The state crushed him for saying it, and now they have brought him back because he was right. But they have brought him back only after stripping him of the power to do anything about it. The bigger picture. So, what are we really looking at? Is this a return to the golden age of Chinese tech? Unlikely. The trust is broken. Capital has a long memory. Investors now know that in China, your business does not belong to you. It belongs to the state, and you are merely holding it until they decide they want it back. The story of Jack Ma is not just a story about one billionaire. It is a case study in the fundamental tension of the 21st century, the battle between authoritarian control and the chaotic freedom required for innovation. The Chinese Communist Party wants the golden eggs, the economic growth, the technological supremacy, the global influence. But they are terrified of the goose. They are terrified of the independent power centers that tech giants create. They tried to put the goose in a cage, they clipped its wings, they starved it, and when it stopped laying eggs, they dragged it out of the cage and demanded it start laying again. But economics doesn't work like that. Innovation requires a sense of safety. It requires the belief that if you build something extraordinary, you will be allowed to keep it. Jack Ma's return to the fold is not a sign of strength for the Chinese economy. It is a sign of weakness. It is an admission that the state-led model has hit a wall. They have realized that you cannot regulate your way to prosperity. You cannot arrest your way to innovation. But the damage is done. The generation of Chinese entrepreneurs watching this saga unfold has learned a very different lesson than the one Beijing intended. They haven't learned to be more patriotic. They have learned to be more careful. They have learned to keep their heads down, to move their money offshore, and to never, ever speak the truth into a microphone. The Green Dragon has returned to the cave, but the fire is gone. And without that fire, the engine of the world's second largest economy is running cold. The question is no longer whether Jack Ma can save China's economy. The question is whether anyone can save an economy that devours its own creators. Jack Ma's story serves as a warning to the world. It reveals the fragile architecture beneath the massive skyscrapers of Shanghai. It forces us to ask, what is the true cost of control? And when the next visionary rises in the east, will they reach for the stars, or will they simply look at Jack Ma, check their bank account, and decide that it's safer to stay on the ground? Drop your thoughts below. Does this return signal a new boom, or is it just the final act of a tragedy? And if you want to understand how the other titan of tech, TikTok, is fighting a war on two fronts against both Washington and Beijing, you need to click this video right here. It's a deeper rabbit hole than you think. I'll see you there.